Let me read a favorite passage that I know I've shared numerous times at this church. Philippians chapter 1. Paul said, I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion till the day of Christ Jesus. It is right for me to feel this way about all of you, since I have you in my heart. For whether I am in chains or defending and confirming the gospel, all of you share in God's grace with me. God can testify how I long for all of you with the affection of Christ Jesus. And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, may be pure and blameless until that day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. I thank my God for all of you. I am so humbled to be able to share briefly with you today. And as I reflect back on these years, I'm even more so humbled when I realize the privilege that was mine to pastor this great church for 7 years. It is always a bit emotional for Ray and me to come back to Baptist Temple, because it is always that feeling of coming home. Though we've been gone now 11 years, it still feels as if we come home when we come to Baptist Temple. As I look across the room, I realize that all of us have been affected by this church. All of us. We've had great spiritual moments together in the place called Baptist Temple. We've been changed from within, and with the gray hair, we've been changed without. We have matured, definitely physically, but I hope spiritually. Think of those times like you had this morning through the years, those worship moments when we experienced God and we left saying, wasn't it good to be so close to God? The times of fellowship, perhaps, are the times that ring out most in my mind as I recall great moments of true Koinonia fellowship. And of course, missions and ministry. It was the fall of 1994 when Maria and I drove I-35 from the Waco area and came to San Antonio, this big town, Maria, great with child. We exited as we did today at this Gevers New Braunfels exit. Saw this great 3-building, didn't know there was a 4th building connecting back there. The committee tried their best. They were so smart in that they had Louise fix Mexican food, enchiladas for us. We met with the pastor search committee. After meeting with that committee, again, so brilliant, we walked through the buildings. Of course, we were in McGregor, one building, and we walked to the office. They said, look at this big pastor study. Oh, it was good. And look at this children's building, 3 layers. And look at this, whatever building, Max called it ABC, Education Chapel. I had to make sure I called it the right one. And then we walked into the sanctuary, and I will never forget that feeling. The beauty, the magnificence of that sanctuary. They said, well, walk on up to the pulpit. Oh, it felt really good. We looked at this building, and we looked at the Fighting Back building. We didn't go in them, and then we left and drove home. I remember going to the chairman of deacons in McGregor and saying, I've got to go away. We've got to figure out what we're doing. We went fishing, and fishing always helps you figure out what to do. One of the hardest calls I ever made, because I was afraid of him, and I called Jim Wagner and said, thanks but no thanks, we're not coming. And I could just see Jim turning red in the face, I'm sure he did. And we said no, and we had Adeline in January, and Richard Good, always the salesman that he was, called the day after Adeline was born and said, have you had that baby yet? Well, he knew, liar, he knew we had. Have you had that baby? Yes, we have. Well, why don't you talk to us now? And all those things that had been such great concern of doctors and hospitals and first baby, suddenly all that was gone. And so we did, of course, talk to Baptist Temple again. And this time they didn't let Louise feed us enchiladas. Jim and Sharon Widener met us in Austin. And it all made sense. And of course we came in the spring of 1995. It was overwhelming. I'll never forget sitting in a room with Gary and Danny and Kirby and Guillermo and all these guys saying, "So now what are you going to do?" And I'm saying, I have no idea what I'm going to do. Don't tell me. But the first thing I did, which I wish other pastors would figure it out, I was just lucky to figure it out, is that I read and studied a whole lot about the history of this church. I remember going to the library and reading through all those volumes that Fanning Neal had put together and bound of the Temple Times. Immediately, I began to see what this church was and began to appreciate her past. I began to look at the pastors who had been here. I began to study those pictures in that hallway. Across from the senior adult suite, we called it. Every picture. How many hours I spent looking at those pictures. I remember when we moved those pictures, it almost cost me our job. But we studied all those pictures. Those vacation Bible school pictures, it was the history of this church. And as I reflect on that, I knew then, what I still know now, is that Baptist Temple was a very unique church. It was different in its day from its inception. It was an innovative church. It was a community-minded church. It was a church that always had the pulse beat of the society, the community, especially the Southeast Quadrant. Think of what this church was doing in the 60s and the 70s. They were far above what even First Baptist and Trinity would do in later years. Now, it wasn't a perfect church. As I say about First Baptist San Marcos, we're not perfect, but we're good. And we're striving to get better. And I think that might be this church as well. Not perfect, but good. And always striving to get better. Oh, we had highs and some great high moments of again, fellowship and worship. And we had some lows. We had a lot of calm. And we had a few storms. But isn't that what church and family is about? I reflected in the last few weeks on some of those pastors that I read about. I remember Brother Powell. Brother Powell came from First Baptist Church San Marcos as pastor to Baptist Temple to pastor. And then he left Baptist Temple and went back to San Marcos. But he didn't make it very long there the second time. Things always look better when you think and they work good when he went back. Jesse Yelvington, I can remember the stories of Jesse Yelvington walking through Highland Park, walking the neighborhood, so ingrained in this community. What a stalwart he was. Of course, there was no one like Dr. Vernon Elmore. You know, he was the Baptist statesman throughout not only Texas, but throughout the Southern Baptist Convention. He had such a vision and such a ministry. I recently did a funeral in Corpus Christi. I was there early, and as I walked through the cemetery, the third grave I walked to was Vernon Elmore. What a leader. Lauren Light came at such an interesting time in the life of this church. Again, pushing that social ministry, the clinic that Rose Flynn worked with, and all of that social ministry that Lauren saw. But perhaps not influenced me more than Bill Perdue. Being my predecessor, I wasn't quite sure about Bill. You know, I didn't know if Bill would ever like me or if I was supposed to like him. You know, one of those things. I wasn't sure. Bill had an ego and I had an ego, and I didn't know if we could both fit in the same room. But Bill and I became dear friends. Bill became very supportive of my ministry, always was. And I'll never forget being asked to have a part in his funeral service as Bill was able to reflect upon his years here. Of course, folks who were here during Bill's years remember the Together We Build, United We Build, Forever We Build, all of those things. And so you can see why I, throughout my years, always felt a bit overwhelmed. These great, wonderful leaders who have provided pastoral leadership for this church. From 1995 to 2002, still 11 years looking back from the time we left, some of the greatest years of my ministry and my life. Some of that has to, of course, do with Maria and me and our kids. Our second Sunday here was the Sunday we were able to dedicate Adeline. It was the second Sunday of May. Adeline was not even 4 months old. We still weren't sure how to hold her or what to do with her. But we knew we wanted to dedicate her to the Lord, and we did so. Maria's parents were here. My parents were here. We have a picture of all of us standing around one of those typical huge Felix flower arrangements mirrored in the pulpit itself in this little baby. Adeline was baptized in our building. What a privilege to baptize your daughter in that place where she was baptized in this church. I remember announcing to the church that, guess what? Another one is coming. Not sure what that was, but now we know it was Truett. And we dedicated Truett. We should have done it 3 or 4 times. But let me tell you today, because I think this reflects back on Baptist Temple. Today, Alan's a freshman at Baylor. Imagine that. But a freshman at Baylor. Alan always wanted to be a school teacher. She made poor Truett go to school his whole life. Before he ever got to school, he was already burned out. But 2 years ago, Alan went on a mission trip with Buckner to Ethiopia and to Kenya. And she came back from that, and then shortly thereafter said, I really feel called to work with orphans and to be involved with an organization like Buckner. And so her major at Baylor is something child and family studies and social work. And so I just believe that through GAs, through missions, through standing up next to one of those girls at that acting coronation, something about missions and ministry connected with Adeline. Truett, 6'2½", plays varsity basketball, junior in high school, told us recently, you know, unless I get a really good basketball scholarship, I'll probably go to Baylor because you know I'm going to be a pastor like you, Dad, and then I'll just go on to Truett Seminary. I mean, since it was kind of named for me and everything. And he said, and the great thing is, Dad, I'll just use your old sermons. I said, no, you won't. That's not how that works. Dad, he said, I'll change those illustrations. No. All of that, I do believe, goes back to this church. Those founding years where my children as preachers' kids loved that they could be who they were, that they were accepted, they were loved, they were nurtured, they were encouraged by a place called Baptist Temple. As I reflect on those years that we served here, there are numerous things that rise to the top. I appreciate Gary and Jonathan being here. We had some great staff relationships. We had some great times to vision, to color outside the walls, outside the lines, to go beyond the walls, and to enjoy a good friendship. I appreciate that this church knew who they were, and I credit so much of that to Bill Perdue, who began in some very different years in Baptist life to give this church direction towards the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship and the Baptist General Convention of Texas. That this church knew who real Baptists were and that they wanted to be a real Baptist church. That in those years we continued to battle, moving from legalism to grace and being able to accept each other and accept our differences. Louise mentioned beyond these walls and 7 and 7 or 8 and 8, 9 and 9 and those events. Habitat for Humanity, when we came today, we couldn't help but exit on Roland and drive through the neighborhood and find the Habitat houses on I or H Street. We just drove by them and saw this one and saw that one. Maria and I to this day say we were never more tired in our entire life than that first Thursday when we worked all day long, Robbie Cameron working on that fence and all of us working and went home never so exhausted, ever than that one day of working Habitat. But when I do think back, I do believe that there were years, whether it was intentional or just happened, where we probably got into a mode of maintaining. Things were good. We were happy for the fellowship. We were happy anytime the budget was all right. And we kind of maintained where we were and what we were doing. Some of that time, maybe we were trying to revive or survive. Some of those times we were visiting and revisiting what we're thinking. I remember having a 15-year vision plan. 15 years? Life, we could do 15 months. But we spent a lot of time trying to figure out who we were and what we were going to be. You know, the Fritz building at that time was used by Boy Scouts on Monday and by ceramics on Monday, and was closed the rest of the week. Fighting back, we couldn't wait to get them out because we needed that building for storage. So they were gone. We had a great big storage building. We had the ball field, but that was another day and we didn't use it anymore, and we were anxious to get rid of it. We had a Pipe Creek, and we tried to make it a ministry, but really it was a noose around our neck. And even our old buildings, we have to be honest, the chapel building was used on Sundays. And Carl Gerald put a lot of paint in that building, as he did all these buildings. But after Sunday, that chapel building was only used by Albert when he took a nap in one of the pews. It wasn't used anymore the rest of the week. It was not this Albert. Not Albert. He may have napped too, but Albert the custodian. He's the one. Where's Albert? He's in the chapel. He will sleep on the pew. That's what. The CDC building was used all week long, especially the first and second floor. The third building floor was used on Sunday mornings. The sanctuary, as beautiful as it was, we used it Sunday mornings and a handful of us on Sunday nights, but not to where it was too hard to go up there on Wednesday nights. We needed to be shook up. Our community was changing. It had been changing. We tried to pass out Bibles. We did the Jesus Now project or one of those, but we just needed to be shook up. Well, so God tends to do that. So He moved me out, brought Phil McGraw in, and that was quite a shake-up, but that's another plan. But you see, God had a plan through all of that. He really did. It's so much easier to see God's plan and God's will often when we're beyond it, isn't it? On the 95th anniversary of the church, that's always during Advent time, always a busy time for any pastor. And I remember Gary, the folks called and said, "Can you come back?" And I said, "It's really not good." And no, timing. Crockett Thigpen called me and said, "You just got to come." He said, "I won't be alive at the 100th, and I don't think the church will either." Well, we came. Well, Crockett didn't make it to the 100th, but the church did. And I want you to know, I think George Jorge is God's man for this church at this time. See, God was working out His plan. This church today, and I read your website, and I get your emails, it's not just the Baptist church in Southeast San Antonio, but I think it is the community church that is reaching out in some untold ways to this community. It is truly a lighthouse like this church has been from its inception. It's doing ministry and mission in some creative ways that any church can learn from. As I begin my 11th year at First Baptist San Marcos, I reflected today. In 10 years, 9 of those years, we've been in the midst of a capital campaign. We are right now beginning our 4th capital campaign. So 9, 3, 6, 9. So we'll begin this one. I did my final campaign sermon this morning. But it's so interesting because capital campaign, folks are going to give. What do they give to that? Don't give to the budget. We have all those things. Consultants appreciate that. The 1 year in the 10 years that we've not been in a capital campaign is this year. And we've had more financial struggle this year than all my 10 years separate. Now I tell that to my stewardship chairman. We meet to do budget tomorrow night. And he'll say, "Well, something's wrong with your math." I don't think so. I think that in the midst of giving beyond and above our tithes and offerings, our folks remember, and I think God blesses what we're about. Our church, our debt payment is $40,000 a month. Well, that takes a lot of ministry and mission away from us. So we're working to reduce our debt And yet our capital campaign that we're in right now is for our next building, a family life center. We're out of space. And though we complain about another building and raising more funds and a gymnasium and a new kitchen and how all that happens, I'm reminded, as this church must be reminded, how many churches would give anything to have that problem. To not have Sunday school space, to need more fellowship space, to have families and need to have a place for families to come. Why do we do that? Because we know there are so many folks that are hopeless, that are lost, so many families that are pulled in so many directions, that the church may be that only place that for a brief moment they can have a respite from this world, a respite from their hectic schedules, where they can worship in fellowship, where they can be encouraged. Our theme for our campaign this year is Bold Hope. We base that on Paul's words to the church at Corinth. You know, that Corinthian church had all types of problems. They were so conflicted. And yet in the midst of 2 Corinthians, Paul said, therefore, with all your problems and all your mess, therefore, we have confidence, not in them. Confidence in the gospel. We have confidence. And because of this confidence, we are very bold. Very bold because of the confidence of Jesus Christ. I'm grateful for this church. And I'm grateful that this church is taking this bold step to say it's time to get some new funds to do and to continue to undergird the ministry. The text I read, I thank my God in all my prayers because of the partnership. Partnership. Though we're not all members of this church, there is still a partnership from the first day until now. In verse 10, I read, Paul said, I pray that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth and insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best. I hope as we leave here, even today, those of us who are not part of this church, and even those who are, who yet to discern what is best for you in your giving, that we would discern what's best in our relationship to this church. Pastor, one last word. I use this today. I don't always read Rick Warren's blog, but this week someone sent me his blog. It was Tuesday. And Tuesday, Rick Warren said this to pastors. As a shepherd of the flock, you have three choices. You can be the undertaker who buries the church. You can be the caretaker who takes care of the church. Or you can be the risk taker that moves the church. I'm grateful that your pastor leading you as the risk taker to step out of the comfort, to step out and risk. For as I told our church this morning, it's really not a risk. Not when you're walking with God. When I put on my sports jacket, I don't know where this came from. I don't know. I have no idea. The last time I wore this coat, here's what I found this afternoon at 2:15. God sees each and every deed, every thought his eye can read. I'm always in his sight. Let me do what is right. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans for good and not harm, to give you hope and a future. Thank you all for letting me share.
Thank you.